The wind carried dust along the wall like smoke. From the parapet of Samaria, you could see fields burned down to stubble, fig trees stripped, the road a pale scar running toward the Aramean camp where fires burned without a sound. The city's gate stood half open for air because there was nothing left to let in or out. A woman in a torn shawl pressed both hands to the wood and stared until her eyes watered, as if hunger would clear if she could only find a different horizon. On the wall above her, a guard worked his jaw with no food in it and watched dogs fight over a scrap of leather. Inside the market square, traders sat behind empty mats and called out prices anyway, because the act of selling felt like the last law left. A donkey's head, gray skin shining where it had been scraped, went for 80 silver. A measure of dove's dung, husks and bitter seed, anything that could be boiled and swallowed, was offered for 5. The siege had settled in like a season. It was Ben-Hadad's army camped beyond the fields, ringed in tents and picket lines, shutting the city as tight as a jar. The king of Israel, Joram son of Ahab, moved along the wall with a few men at his back, his robe stained with dust at the hem. He kept his face set in the expression rulers learn when nothing they say will change the truth. Beneath the cloth, hidden until a gust lifted it, he wore sackcloth against his skin. He had fasted, prayed, paced, weighed surrender, and found it a measure he could not pour without choking. He could not break the siege by force. He could not fill the granaries by order. He could watch. That day, as he passed the lower gate, a woman cried to him and did not use the word, "my lord." "Help," she said, and the word had no softness. He answered as a man answers when he cannot provide bread and must provide something. "If the Lord does not help you, how can I? Do you want grain from a threshing floor that is empty? Wine from a press that is dry?" He tried to pass. She stepped in front of him, small, hair stuck to her cheek, and told him what he could not ignore even in a war. "This woman said to me, 'Give your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we will eat my son.' So we boiled my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Give your son,' but she has hidden him." The words were flat, not screamed, as if the telling itself had used the last strength she owned. The king tore his robe. The people saw sackcloth under it and did not soften. His own eyes filled, then hardened. He needed someone to blame who was not himself, and not the God he would not accuse in public. He found the nearest name with authority and hope attached to it, and turned it into a target. "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely," he said, "if the head of Elisha son of Shaphat remains on his shoulders today." Elisha sat in his house with elders who had come to beg for a word that would change the weather or the army or both. There was no food on his table either. He told them to bar the door because the messenger from the king was already on the street. "His master will follow close behind," Elisha said, hearing what others could not. When the knock came, it was the handle of a spear against wood. The king arrived and stood in the doorway, face fierce with need and anger. "This disaster is from the Lord," he said. "Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" Elisha answered with the calm of a man who has learned to speak only what he means to carry. "Hear the word of the Lord. About this time tomorrow, a sea of fine flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." It was not a metaphor. It was a price and a time. An officer on whose arm the king leaned let a laugh escape, not from wit, but disbelief turned sharp. "Look," he said, "even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, could this happen?" Elisha's eyes did not shift. "You will see it with your own eyes," he said, "but you will not eat any of it." Night reached the Aramean camp with the even spread of a blanket. Fires burned, pots hung over coals, horses stamped and blew in the dark. Somewhere after dusk, the watch heard a sound that did not belong to any single army. It was the clatter of many chariots, and the thunder of horsemen, and the tramp of companies moving at speed across hard ground. It grew and rolled like weather. Men sat up, grabbed belts, stared into the dark hills. A rumor formed the way rumors do when fear needs a shape. The king of Israel must have hired the kings of the Hittites and the Egyptians. They were surrounded by a force too large to face. Panic doesn't argue with evidence. The officers shouted to hold lines. The soldiers threw on their cloaks and ran. They left tents standing, fires banked, pots on hooks, bread half-baked on flat stones, coins in bags, harness on pegs. They took only their lives and the conviction that they would keep them by running. At the city gate, 4 men sat where lepers sat, outside, near enough to listen to the guards' jokes, and far enough that no one had to look at them long. They were skeletons wrapped in sores. They had watched the last weeks pass in ragged hours. That night, when the wind dropped for a moment, they spoke the only logic left to them. Why stay here until we die? If we say, we'll enter the city, the famine is there, and we will die. If we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the Aramean camp. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, we die. They stood and moved like men already dead. They climbed the last rise to the outermost tents and waited for a challenge. A horse nickered from the picket line. No one cursed them. No one shouted. The nearest tent flap moved in the breeze. Inside, a lamp burned low, and on a mat lay bread and meat and a skin of wine. A cloak lay folded at the foot of a bed without a body in it. The next tent held silver coins in a bag and a shirt of fine linen. The men ate first, shoved meat into mouths too tight with hunger to open properly, washed it down, swallowed until they coughed and laughed, then went out to bury coins under a bush because old habits stay long after pride has left. They went to a second tent, did it again, then stopped with a sudden restraint that carried shame with it. "We're not doing right," one said. "This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once." The gatekeepers woke a captain, who woke the commander, who woke the king. The first message sounded like mockery. The Aramean camp stood, and no Arameans stood in it. The king answered with suspicion, trained by survival. "I will tell you what the Arameans have done. They know we are starving. They have left their camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city." He sent 2 chariots with their horses to test. They followed the road toward the Jordan and found it strewn with cloaks, swords, packs, and gear thrown off by men who run and do not stop to tie anything down. They returned with the simple truth. The enemy had fled. The city opened like a lung. People poured through the gate and down the road, past the lepers waving arms thin as poles, into the camp where steam still rose from pots and flatbread crusted on stones. They ate standing up, crying with their mouths full, then carried what they could in baskets and on backs, then thought to load grain onto donkeys and wagons. Traders set up in the dust within an hour because a market is a reflex. The prices at the gate snapped to the ones Elisha had said in a room the day before. A seah of fine flour for a shekel, 2 seahs of barley for a shekel. The officer who had laughed at the prophecy stood by the gate to keep order and never made it through the press. When the second wave of people surged, a wall of bodies hungry enough to forget that bodies can be broken, he was knocked down and trampled. By noon, his men had dragged him to the side too late. In Elisha's house, the elders sat quietly as the news arrived in pieces from grooms and boys with dust on their lips. The prophet did not smile. He did not gloat. He had seen enough days turn in 1 hour to know the price of relief. In the palace, the king took off his sackcloth and ate. He ate careful, slowing himself because too fast swallowing sickens a man who has fasted that long. He sent for measures to be weighed and counted in public to make the word tomorrow from the prophecy into today in the mouths of the people. At the edge of the Aramean camp, 4 men with ruined skin scraped a shallow pit and pulled the bags of silver they had buried a few hours before. They stood holding the weight and then set it down. One took instead a warm loaf wrapped in cloth and tucked it under his arm, as if it were a child. They walked back toward the gate together, pausing when the crowd pressed too thick, learning that even after deliverance, you must push to get where you are going. On the road beyond the deserted tents, garments still lay where men fleeing for their lives had dropped them, proof that panic has a shape and a color. By evening, fires in the city burned blue again with fat and not just sticks, and the smoke smelled like food instead of old leather. Mothers who had hidden their children in back rooms opened the doors and did not count minutes anymore. The woman who had pulled the king to the gate in despair found a corner and sat with her head against the wall and did not speak. There are losses that end with relief and losses that relief cannot touch. The day after, traders argued over scales as if the argument itself could set them back to normal. The king walked the market without sackcloth because rulers prefer to be seen with their clothes in order when fortunes turn. Elisha moved through the same crowds and was not jostled. People who had cursed him in their hunger now nodded and looked away. The officer lay outside the gate where the guards kept a small strip of bare ground for railroaded justice, and the silence around him was the only honor he would get. The siege had ended without a sword stroke. Samaria's walls stood as they had the day before. The Arameans would come again in some season to test the gates. The city would remember that deliverance can arrive like a rumor and fill the streets like a flood. It would also remember that hunger can make neighbors into threats, and that the truth a prophet speaks does not bend to disbelief, even when disbelief wears a uniform and stands at a gate. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.